when you start looking at the margin compression and the operational cost increase, that is going to be a huge pathway forward because physicians have to protect the autonomy of the profession. So what can't be done is I can just want to find somebody that can do it for less. I think the physician needs to absolutely put their kind of line in the sand, and direct virtual supervision is a way for them to do that.
Well, hey, Jordan, I appreciate you joining me. I've known Jordan for a number of years now, and I knew him first as the founder of Bridge Oncology, but now he's so much more. Jordan, what is Bridge Oncology, and how did you get from the transition from the founder to becoming more of a healthcare thought leader and speaker?
Oh, absolutely. Pleasure. And it was an interesting ride, to say the least. So, I started out in clinical healthcare as a radiologic technologist, as a radiation therapist. Then I moved to being a hospital administrator, and from a hospital administrator, kind of in that consulting space, mainly around billing, coding, compliance. And then about 4 years ago, founded Bridge Oncology um, with a friend of mine, Dr. Arpit Chabra, and really seeing where healthcare was going uniquely to that radiation oncology space. We formed the company, and then it kind of just segued of doors opening and really reaching out. I can tell you very similar to how we had dialogue. Is oftentimes you see a lot of people on social media and LinkedIn, and if you just reach out and maybe there's an opportunity to connect or do something, and really that's how everything progressed. Is somebody needed help with something, you help them out, and then they open a door, and before you know it, in very short order, things have progressed, and you're talking to different groups of people. You're in DC, and it just keeps going.
Just keeps rolling. You're. It seems like you've gone beyond just oncology and the topic of oncology. Give me an idea of kind of the things that you're involved in now and some of your most recent interests.
Oh, absolutely. I think some of the biggest interest, and that was the fundamental thought of being in oncology, is that it really applies to the other verticals within medicine. I think some of the bigger things that I've taken interest in has been access to care. Rural healthcare has been a very big, important topic. I live in rural Mississippi, so rural healthcare is a big one. Price transparency and pricing of medicine overall, of how that works. Medicare, Medicaid, the commercial payers. How do we continue to hold everybody accountable so that we have that transparency, so that healthcare is not just accessible, but it's transparently affordable, and people know what they're getting instead of just a random price. And so I would say pricing's been a big topic.
Well, lately you've been asked to serve on some federal committees, particularly on looking at certain changes to HIPAA, one of the subcommittees. Tell me how that came about.
Oh, absolutely. So we talked about one of those contacts, and I have a close friend I've known for a while. Sean Weiss has been in the space, very well known and respected, and he knew of some committees that were coming up, and he said, "Hey, you should give this a shot." And so one of those committees was the National Committee on Vital Health and Statistics, Healthcare and Statistics, and so it's an 18-person subcommittee. That subcommittee rolls up 2 levels to one of the committees that's directly connected to Dr. Oz and RFK. And so what we look at is, how that data, we look at data in healthcare, how it's collected, standardized, used across the continuum and spectrum. And then, like you said, we oversee as a subcommittee, but the HIPAA standards, administration, how those rules are administered, simplification of those rules in an ever changing environment with everything that's going on now with AI and the cloud. And so that's really what the committee is focused on. And some of that is, I think you brought up a point we had talked earlier, is these are so outdated. I mean, 2003, you're talking the late 90s, 2003, since a lot of, yeah, since a lot of this has been looked at.
Well, so this committee is pretty new. It was like the end of March, right, that you were appointed?
Yep. So end of March, got appointed, and now we're just moving right along. So now that we've been appointed, I think we've had 3 meetings so far, several more scheduled, upcoming, and really it's very fast paced. And there's lots of material to review. You're looking at stuff like you said from years ago, and getting all caught up and really adding your context. And you've got other committee members. I mean, other committee members have backgrounds. Most everybody has a touch in healthcare, and there's legal, there's data, there's physicians, and so everybody kind of comes together, and it's been interesting. I would say we used to say, and the government moves pretty slow. This committee does not move slow, so it's at least a small break of what I thought, and I figured it was going to be like the DMV or the post office, and it was definitely not like that.
So I know you can't talk to us about the substance of your deliberations, but what kind of topics specifically are you looking at? What topics fall under the heading of healthcare or vital healthcare statistics?
So absolutely. So some of the things, obviously, we talked about HIPAA. We look at the electronic transmission of claims, remittance, could be some of the code sets, things that affect revenue cycle, data privacy, data access, privacy protections. That would be one of the things that gets looked at. Some of the we look at identifying gaps in current data exchange and transmission. So we all know that some of the national standards have been like fire and data protection and cloud based. So it really covers all of those things. And then it looks at it through the lens of a healthcare system, from a physician or a provider, from the lens of a vendor, and then other policy experts. We have some touch into FDA, a little bit into FDA, not too much, where we give some oversight and look through the lens of some of the policies that govern medicine as it relates to the FDA.
Are y'all going to produce like a deliverable, like a report, like with recommendations? What is it y'all are working toward?
So that's exactly it. So you produce a report, whatever the topic is, you're going to produce that report. That report is then going to be read, interpreted, and recommendations can be given, and then that rolls up to the committees above us, and then actions taken based on those recommendations. So that is the goal of the subcommittee.
One of the big HIPAA topics right now is the updated security rule that was supposed to go into effect, sometime this year in May or so of 2026. Do you have any input on whether that's actually going to take place, or when that happens, or how it's going to happen?
I hope. Listen, it's been one of those. It definitely has been a hot topic. I think we don't have too much insight into that yet. I think there are tons of reasons that it probably should. We could proceed down that road. I mean, um, tying one of the things I think you had mentioned is the whole Medicare Medicaid participation, and that's a topic that's regardless of the committee has come up over and over, and something we talk about um, in different settings. And I think tying Medicare Medicaid participation, I definitely think it's the right move. Given the scale of the current threats that we have, the data breaches, the ransomware, things like that. But I think it's got to be paired with some kind of targeted oversight, funding, technical support. And then I don't think you can just, but we know this through experience and having done this before, but you can't just dump something on and expect it to happen the next day. I think an incremental phased approach or something like that is the only way that it's going to be successful at the speed of healthcare, how fast it moves.
You mentioned data privacy, and obviously that's a big topic. I have to think, though, that the last few years and the progression of artificial intelligence, AI, and particularly AI in healthcare, has to be a driver. How is AI factoring into y'all's work product?
I think AI, that's one of the things that's on the horizon. Will be something I'm sure that ourselves and a bunch of other people in the government are looking at right now. You can look at headlines where they've tried to start. I know RFK has been a big proponent of AI, but it's the need of government oversight for standardization. It's the need for what's usable, what's not, what's true, what's a hallucination. I think we're in the early innings of the ball game when it comes to AI, and now is the time to get some set of guardrails around that and standardization. I think that'll be one of the big drivers, especially if it relates to clinical decisions that are being made. So, not just a check on billing and coding. I think AI for autonomous billing and coding, that's out there now. I think a lot of the platforms are very effective. I think they reduce costs. But when it comes to actually making clinical decisions or suggestions, for medication, for surgical procedures, or even, as the radiologists use them right now, radiologists use them as a secondary check to look for lesions or spots on a scan. And I think when you get into that, that's where really the oversight and the vetted enforcement needs to be there. And so I think that'll be one of the biggest drivers.
Do you know, is it on the horizon that there could be some federal regulations targeted for AI, whether it comes out of your subcommittee or another committee or not? Is that on the horizon?
I think based on things that we've already seen, I think it absolutely is on the horizon. I mean, it's great that the states have picked it up, but the problem is the implication and the application is so wide that if we have 50 states and 50 states have their own interpretation, again, there's good and bad in that, but I think at scale, that's probably more difficult than it is
Yeah.
good. So you have to have that federal oversight.
Yeah, it becomes a patchwork of legislation. And while a patchwork is better than no quilt at all, it makes compliance difficult when there are so many variations of a rule you have to comply with. So, to the extent there's an ability to standardize some of the AI rules as it relates to healthcare and use of patient data, I that would certainly make compliance more uniform across the board.
And I think that's one of the big things right now is the level of patient data that's out there right now. I mean, there's a lot of data that's out there. It's Are we even harnessing it? Are we tapping into it? Are we using that data? Obviously we know people have monetized that data. And now all of a sudden, I think one of the things that caught my eye over the past, I don't know, a few months is that they figured out that all of this anonymized data, I'm sure
Yeah.
you've seen this, all this anonymized data, all of a sudden they're saying that AI has been able to very easily de-anonymize it and
Yeah.
identify. And so I think that's a problem that was probably unexpected, because I think about a lot of the pharma companies and how they got started was a lot of their softwares and programs and platforms were free. They didn't cost the organization anything, and they didn't on the basis of they own the data, right? They own the data. It was going to be theirs as long as it was anonymized. So I think that is going to be over the next probably few months is going to be interesting to see what are the ramifications
Yeah.
for that.
No doubt. I mean, de-identified healthcare data is big business, and under HIPAA, of course, it was written a long time ago. There are 18 markers that if you take out, then that's considered de-identified. The problem is nobody expected AI to be able to re-identify despite having those markers removed. So that's changing the game.
Well,
When
yeah, and to your
Go ahead.
point of needing to update the standards, you just hit the nail on the head. Is those 18, that's great, but it may not be in today's environment. They may not be accurate. They may not be the ones, maybe more need to be on the list, or maybe it needs to be done differently because, when you look at that report of how it was de identifying, I mean, it was taking what you and I would probably consider there's no way you could guess if you only had this and this piece, these two of the 18, there's no way. And it was able to put it together. So I think that it really signifies the need for some kind of expeditious reform.
So when are y'all due to give your report, pass your report on up to, I guess, the head committee?
So yeah, the way it works is it's whatever the issues are. So we don't wait. There won't be like an end. It's whatever the issue is or whatever's pressing. We'll take it, review it, give input, give our thoughts and opinions, um, and then it gets passed up from there on what that issue is. And it's also based on timelines. So if they have something that's pressing or a deadline's coming up, it'll get put to us as is something similar as, hey, this is more expedited urgency, so this will take precedence.
I see. So this is a standing committee, and as issues come up, you'll be asked to give input, and you'll give that input, and then you'll receive another topic that you have to consider.
It's
So how
exactly
long
right.
is your term then? I mean, is this perpetual?
It's I wish. No, it's a 4 year term. It's a 4 year
Okay.
term. So
All
4 year
right.
term cycles off. There's no running for reelection. There's no. I think once you've done your 4, you're out. So
Yeah, time off for good behavior, I'm sure.
that's it.
Um,
That's it.
all right. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit. One of the topics that I think you're intimately interested in is the FTC and their focus on anti competitive behaviors or conduct among healthcare providers and trying to keep the market of healthcare providers um, uh, functioning well so that there's competition. And as a result of competition, the provision of healthcare continues to be in the consumer's best interest rather than the best interest of the business running the healthcare provider. Um,
Uh, that's
and
a
one of
it's a
those
hot.
issues is the FTC and their focus on traditional, business conduct that maybe now becomes non-competitive or anti-competitive. Tell us about it.
Yeah, yeah, man. I think you and again learning from you. The corporate practice of medicine, right? I mean, there's states now. Corporate practice of medicine. Some states had it that were stronger. Texas stronger. Then there were other states that were more relaxed. And so I think what FTC's really seen and what's driven a lot of this, I believe, is private equity. Private equity roll ups in so many different verticals, whether it be dentistry, chiropractic, GI. And I think from an operations standpoint, they're looking at it from not only a provider, but they're also looking at it from the vendors that are inside the space. Is what are the consolidation strategies, the vertical integration? What are those referral patterns that impact it? What equipment are they using? We talked about the vendors. What equipment are they using? That it may limit competition, restrict access, influence some of that clinical decision making
Mm-hmm.
to utilize some of that equipment. I think, we'll get to this here in a minute, but I think that the steerage is what we talk about, right? The steerage or exclusive arrangements. I think that's their focusing. And I think right now they have to, it's a signal for motion to rebalance that alignment or that market power, basically. And I think that's what we're going to see.
As part of your role as in Bridge Oncology, are you involved in any consulting efforts for private equity? I mean, what are you seeing in private equity right now, particularly in like roll up efforts?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's oncology's been interesting because when you look at private equity, the largest private equity, ventures in oncology are pharma companies, right? So we look at, the biggest one probably in oncology is One Oncology. One Oncology was backed by TPG for a deal to translate to Cencora, previously AmerisourceBergen. And so I think those are the kind of deals, and we get called in from physician practices that may join one of those networks, and what does that look like from a competition, from a pay, from a competitive market area versus hospitals, right? Do I join a hospital? Is private equity better? Do I retain my autonomy? And we do get called in to review some of those. I think those are the kind of the tough decisions, the business decisions. I think private equity, again, my personal opinion, and we'll paint this with a broad brushstroke or an umbrella, is private equity in most instances hasn't made healthcare grossly more affordable or accessible or available. And I think there are some private equity companies that do great work in spots. It just became one of those. It happened, really over the past 5 to 10 years that the roll
Mhm.
ups just started happening really, really fast. I think some of that was based on generation too. There was a lot of physicians at that age looking to transition out of practice of medicine, so it made sense for them.
Yeah. So private equity takes several different forms, some of which are just equity roll ups where they'll purchase practices. And then the physicians continue to work for the practice, but they work for the practice more as an employee rather than an owner, or they're an owner of the management side of the entity rather than the provider side of the entity. And that creates potential conflicts of interest where, who's looking out for the patient versus who's looking out for the bottom line. And that I think has been the criticism of private equity is that it's putting the it's pulling focus away from the patients themselves and more toward the business of healthcare.
What do you think about the structure of, I guess, pass it back to you and we can talk about it, but the structure of like, because it's under scrutiny now, but MSOs, right? So that's always been like the workaround. We're going to have the MSO side that's going to take care of the revenue cycle, the prior authorization, the back end office, but the MSO really won't have any oversight or influence into the day to day practice of medicine and the medical decisions being made. But I know there's a lot of emphasis on that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's all the same concept. I mean, whether it's called an MSO or not, or just a management company, you have the management functions separate from the clinical functions, and the management functions a lot of times drives the budget, and the budget drives clinical decision making. And so it does create a tension. Now, in any business, whether you're a healthcare provider or otherwise, you have to be aware of the budget, and dollars do impact kind of the scope of what you can accomplish. But it's the difference of, is my motivation to provide for my patients and make a profit in doing so, or is my motivation to make a profit, as much of a profit as possible, and caring for patients is just the byproduct. And there
And I
is a
think,
natural tension there.
yeah, I mean,
This
especially
is
when a
not a
whole
new issue,
system.
though. This is an issue that's been around a long time. It's just now that companies are with roll-ups, they're buying up more and more of these individual practices, and so people are becoming aware of the inherent conflict of interest more so than they ever have before.
No, I think you're 100% right, especially when we're still built, the house of medicine is still primarily built on a fee for service model, right? And so volume wins. And so that's when you start, we always say basically the MSO's function or private equity is, if you want to arrive at more money or more revenue as a company, you got to do one of two things. Either you're going to cut your way to that by leaning things out, or you got to get more volume. I mean, that's one or the other. That's the only way you can drive that needle.
Yeah, the difference is, like with private equity, the goal of private equity traditionally is to invest, maximize return of profit, and then get out, and realize that profit by selling. Whereas a typical MSO, I say typical, traditionally an MSO would be used for people who were in it for the long term. They would partner with physicians or providers. They couldn't own the medical entity, but they could provide a management function through the MSO, and they were in it for the long term. Their goal was not to flip the practice in a few years and maximize profit. Their function was to serve with the physician to provide a long term solution. And so private equity, the focus has changed. The mechanisms of influence are the same, but the motivation is different, and I think that's what's causing some concern.
No, I think you're 100% right. And I think this, at least over the next year, it's going to be under the microscope, because on the flip side, on the vendor side, we're talking about it from the professional practice side, but on the vendor side, the big question right now is, you have some very strong, we call them blockout vendors, essentially, because you've got vendors that are selling equipment, selling drugs, whatever the hospital needs, but then they may also be the ones that staff the facility. They may also be the ones that do the work on the equipment. They may provide billing and coding support. They may provide the strategy. And all of a sudden, you've got a vendor that's close to some monopoly issues pretty quick. And I think that's one of the things that the FTC is looking at.
Yeah, so traditionally, FTC has been focused on horizontal consolidation, meaning consolidation of competitors. Because think of horizontally as the organizational chart, and horizontally meaning everyone on that level. If they're consolidating, there's fewer competitors in a market, which drives up price traditionally, or lowers the quality of the service or the product, whatever it is. The FTC, you made the point that the FTC is now looking more not just at horizontally, but vertically among supply chains. Talk about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point, it's always been that horizontal, but now it's quickly become okay. once you have, vertical integration sounds good, but all of a sudden these companies, there's vested interest to have that vertical, basically the vertical control, vertical integration, because it's control from top down. It's control of where the ultimately it'll be what the patient has done, where they go, when they need to purchase. If a patient needs to purchase a product, all of a sudden that's part of the vertical integration. I mean, that's the focus in pharma, right? I mean, that's been the focus that's been in the headlines of the vertical integration with, the PBMs, and then the PBMs are tied to the insurance company, and the insurance company, I mean, it kind of works its way all the way back up. Then it's tied to the pharmacy itself. And so I think that's one of the things that's being looked at, but it can also be applied um, to vendors. And I think that's one of the things that FTC wants to look at now on both sides, is that vertical integration. And it'll be interesting to see when they come out with the first, several, and I'm sure they're looking at it and going to come out, but these cases where they've reviewed it, is what do they actually find? Because I think it's more than just, everybody's quick to say, was it Sherman 1 and 2 and then the Clayton, and everybody's quick to throw those out, right? But I think it's deeper than that, in my mind.
Yeah, it's about anti-competitive conduct and ultimately how it impacts the consumer, the healthcare consumer or patients. And of course, the government has an they're invested because because Medicare is such a huge payor for healthcare. And so the fewer providers that there are, the more scarce they are and the higher price they can demand for certain services. And so that's at odds with the public funding of healthcare. So it's a big
Yeah.
issue, and I think the FTC is concerned about it. I think regulators are understandably concerned about the role of private equity, in particular, the continued consolidation of providers in a market, because it impacts the number of competitors and therefore the quality of care in a region.
When you saw the mergers and acquisitions, and on the other side of private equity, but these hospital mergers and acquisitions, I mean, they're huge and they're across state lines. The recent announcement of, I think it's Sutter and Alana Healthcare out of Minnesota. That one, you had Advocate and Atrium. And so, to your point, I think that also drove a lot of the physicians that have now become in oncology. This is what we see. 80% of our rad oncs are now employed physicians. So then that drove, when you had a market capture, drove the non-competes, right? And so then that drove our non-competes, and FTC got pretty deep into that. And I don't think it's by any means off the radar, but these outlandish, I guess we could call them outlandish non-competes, where it's, hey, you can't practice within the same type of medicine within 23 counties, or however, whatever you need to be. But I think that's a hot topic too, still.
Yeah, non-competes are always a big topic in healthcare in particular because they're so common. One of the relief valves that I see though in all these consolidations is the idea of telehealth, meaning that even if there's fewer healthcare providers in a region, to the extent you can have telehealth providers examine and do good faith exams with patients using telehealth tools, remote, whether it be Zoom for healthcare or something similar, that at least provides that takes away some of the geographic constraints for primary care, perhaps urgent care, perhaps. It doesn't really solve the specialty care problem. Maybe radiology, perhaps. Is telehealth? How do you use telehealth in oncology? I mean,
So not as much telehealth, but Bridge Oncology. So it was myself and Dr. Chaba. We actually wrote for CMS the Foundation for Direct Virtual Supervision for Radiation Oncology, which as of January 1st of this year, in the final rule, became, I mean, it's law now that you can use direct virtual supervision. And it's not just for radiation oncology, it's for all specialties. And really what they've said is, to your point, is build a program around it. Obviously, we don't want to do anything that's patient safety, an issue for patient safety. But due to the geographic maldistribution of physicians,
mhm.
I think direct virtual supervision, I mean, it's going to be the only path forward, because even at fair market value, if I'm trying to recruit a physician to a smaller area, if that area, regardless, doesn't treat a large number of patients, the physician's never going to be made whole anyway.
Right.
So then the hospital is going to have to come off the technical or the hospital revenue to make them whole, which if they're already hurting, it's probably not going to happen. And so I think direct virtual supervision can absolutely be done safely. We've actually run the model at several different sites across the United States. We've had really good luck with it. And again, it's about not pushing the envelope. I think when they first rolled it out, that's exactly what they said is, do it safely, do it with guardrails. It's not for so you can just sit at home and work. These are truly areas of need. And what we found is you can actually get better care because a lot of these sites were previously basically destined to hire locums. And a locum
Yeah.
is, they have their place, but in the most part become a 2 week babysitter. So, a doc's out or something like that. Well, now you can get some higher caliber
Yeah.
docs for much less. And I think that's going to drive the market some and really help out.
So is the idea that you can use telehealth with specialists to review care and develop a plan of care, and then have that care implemented by like a mid-level provider, a nurse practitioner, or physician assistant? Is that the plan?
Yep, or the radiation therapist. That's exactly the plan. So what we see is you would have a doctor, that physician could do a consult the patient remotely via secure, two-way audio video. And then from there, CT SIM is going to happen for that patient. A plan is going to be created by the physician, plan of care. And then it's never the physician that carries out that plan of care anyway. Meaning physically, it's the radiation therapist, the physicist, the dosimetrist, and I'm just speaking for radiation oncology. It could be different subsets. Also, we saw this in radiology with the dial back of supervision requirements
Hmm.
for contrast administration. But then it's to have those teams, and then the doctor still sees the patient weekly because they're under treatment for 4 to 6 weeks, still sees them weekly. And then they do go on site, but they're not going to be there 5 days a week. And I think that is, when you start looking at the margin compression that and the operational cost increase, that is going to be a huge pathway forward because I think physicians have to protect the autonomy of the profession. So what can't be done is I can just want to find somebody that can do it for less. I think the physician needs to absolutely put their kind of line in the sand, and direct virtual supervision is a way for them to do that.
So, how does that affect the physician's, the specialist relationship with a hospital, for example? Traditionally, a physician has been associated with a hospital, and they see their patients there. But to the extent telehealth allows them to see patients outside of a hospital setting, does that kind of break some of the dependence a physician might have on a healthcare system or a another healthcare organization if they can just see patients directly without having to be associated with a larger institution?
I think you're going to get into some interesting contracts, exclusivity clauses, what their medical staff's going to allow them to do, what they can't do. But I think it opens it up. I think you have physicians. If we look at academic centers, you have physicians that a lot of physicians work. They're in the clinic 2 days a week. They have a research day. They have an academic day. They have time. When we start looking at RVUs, a lot of physicians have time, and if they still want to do things, they could do it for their organization, but also they could do it, for another organization or another facility that's looking or needs help.
Yeah. I guess the big winners with telehealth are those in medically underserved areas, in rural
That's right.
areas where there's no or very few specialists. Now they can get a world renowned specialist to develop a plan of care, as long as there are local mid level providers skilled enough to actually implement that plan of care. So maybe that's a model for continued expansion, and really a model that can help close some of these healthcare gaps.
And I think that's the National Rural Healthcare Association. Those guys, I think they're exactly to your point. They're looking at it because those sites are already strained anyway, and their ability to recruit is small. They're not going to go way above fair market value. They're going to struggle, and so. But if you could do something like this and have an arrangement, I think it opens things up, and it keeps those access channels up because we've proven over and over that you do hit a mile limit where patients just aren't going to drive. They're not going to go until they're sicker or later stage. So if we could get them that level of care to them, I think it's
Yeah,
a great thing.
maybe you can treat them before it develops into, especially oncology, before it develops, into later stages. Maybe if you get it early with a specialist directing the care, maybe that helps keep them from hitting those later stages so quickly.
Well, if you're looking at it with the payers, right, then you're saving money because the cost is less upfront. So
Yeah,
there's actually incentive to do it. And I think there's incentive to invest for Medicare and even the commercial payers to invest in those programs.
yeah. Well, hey, Jordan, I enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck on the advisory committee. Good luck spending the next 4 years to, walking through some of these issues. And if something comes up that hits kind of the national pulse, we'll have you back on to kind of explore the issue a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Greatly appreciated. Thanks so much.
All right, man. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is created between the hosts, guests, or any listener. The discussion of any legal topic should not be relied upon as a substitute for consultation with a qualified attorney regarding your specific situation. If you need legal advice, please consult an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction.